everyone. This is Rene Dupree. Please check out my podcast, CAFEE de Rene, and you're watching John the Ninja. Please subscribe.
Ladies and gentlemen, how you doing? It's John the Ninja live in the dojo, aka the Dojang, aka the John the Ninja Studios, and the man I'm with. Woo, what a renaissance man he is. It's a good thing he's French, but truly a fascinating and a wonderful career. But the one thing I noticed that we both have in common, we both know what it's like to pump gas out in the blistering cold to achieve our dreams. A little bit about this man. Before we get into it, the first time I saw him, 2004, the WWE Royal Rumble. I was a wide-eyed child, and he in his teens was proving himself in this world of WWE. Not just WWE, but wrestling in general. He is a man that was brought up by the legendary promoter, Emile Duprée, and he hosted many great wrestlers back in the territory days. And one thing you gotta also give it to this gentleman here. He is also Mr. Canada Bodybuilding National Champion. He was the #1 draft pick in the 2004 draft, which before then only The Rock and John Cena were #1 draft pick, so that means something. He's wrestled for all types of promotions, All Japan Pro Wrestling, Wrestling One Great North, and he's won multiple titles, not just World Tag Team, but heavyweight. But I think the biggest thing you have to notice is not only his perseverance by beating his addiction to opiates, but the people he's worked with and the lives he's touched. He's wrestled Rob Van Dam, The Great Muta, Undertaker, Kawada, Akebono. With over 25 years of experience, the man is still going strong, and he has his own podcast himself, CAFEE de Rene with James, who they co-host and go back and forth with many great wrestlers. Ladies and gentlemen, he has been seen over 3 million times on that podcast format, which is no easy task. Take it from me. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I give to you Rene Dupree. Sir, how you doing?
Bonjour, monsieur. Ça va?
Hey, okay, good sir. You know what? I wanted to ask you this. How many languages can you speak, my man? You got French, you got German, you got English, Japanese too, having lived over in Japan for a little bit. Any other languages you got under your belt?
Not German, but French, English, and Skoshi Nihongo.
Okay.
A little bit of Japanese, yeah.
But that's mighty impressive, and just another belt, another notch on the belt for all the things you were able to do because wrestling's been so good to you. I know you just wrestled in Farrington not too long ago, maybe a week or two, and that was kind of like a homecoming for you because your first match was out near Woodstock. So how was that coming home? I know it was like maybe 700 deep of people, but anytime you're home, anytime you get a warm reception, that's got to feel good.
Yeah, feels really good. Yeah, like you said, it was a really good house for an independent, close to 700 people. Yeah, it was. It's always good to come back home. I like being able to leave at 5 o'clock, get to the show, and be back in my house before midnight. That's always a good feeling.
I understand. I used to wrestle a little bit in New Jersey, and man, it was an all-day event for us, but I was still paying my dues. But before any more wrestling, before any more questions about the life you've lived, I gotta ask, man, I know you're a metal kid. I know you like your heavy metal. I know you like your hard rock. I have to ask you who your favorite band is, man. Even with the Ozzy shirt on, his birthday was the other day. I know you got detained to England wearing the Ozzy shirt, so I'm just excited, man. Who's your go-to band?
I'd have to put Black Sabbath up there as #1.
With Dio or Ozzy? Do you give credibility to Dio?
Oh yeah, Dio's great too, but definitely Ozzy.
What got you into metal, and do you play? Like, I'm very fascinated that you're in the same ballpark. Like, I know Metallica's coming around, and you guys are going to be able to get them after that big riot that happened into the 90s. So, like, what got you into the music?
My mom had these old records, records on a record player. And yeah, Paranoid by Black Sabbath was the first song I heard from Black Sabbath. And then A Whole Lot of Love by Led Zeppelin. So those were the two songs that really, and then I started playing bass. I tried playing in a band, but I couldn't keep up. So I just, I had my own personal amplifier, I had a BC Ridge bass, and that's what I would do in my, when I wasn't working out or wrestling, I'd play bass in my room by myself.
Do you still play every now and again? Or
No, I bought a Fender about 10 years ago and then tried to get back into it, but with all the traveling I'm doing and stuff, it's kind of hard. So
have you been able to see any special shows, any shows that stick with you in the back of your mind that just pop out?
I went and seen Kid Rock twice. He's extremely talented. I went to Rob Zombie in Atlanta. That was I didn't really care for that much. Although I like Rob Zombie's music. but the show was lackluster. Who else did I see? When I was a little kid, I went and watched the Beach Boys. Beach Boys, Ugly Kid Joe, CCR, Clearance Clearwater Revisited. It was the original band, but it was a different singer. It wasn't John Fogerty. There's a guy that sounded just like him. That was a pretty badass concert, actually. Yeah.
I gotta give it.
Bob Dylan.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Bob Dylan when I was like 13.
I gotta give it to Kid Rock, man. When I first went, it was kind of I'm a big music guy, so it was like hip hop and rock all together. So that really threw me off. I was like, oh, he's doing it like that. But you know, the fact that you've done so much traveling and you've been able to read these autobiographies, and you know, basically you live the life of a rock star, just way more tolling. You know, but the one thing that did catch me is you are also in charge of your parents' business. You guys own properties. You have made a very significant investment. I believe you were 19 at the time, that now has pretty much not made you a billionaire, but it set you up for life. And I was wondering what your pretty much your lessons were as far as learning about real estate in Canada and becoming a property manager for your family.
Well, since my father was in the business, you know, he's seen it all. So there's an old quote: "It's not how much money you make in wrestling; it's how much money you save and invest." So my first year as La Resistance on Raw was probably my best year financially. So I sent everything home to Canada, and then we bought our first property, and then I bought another one and another one. So yeah, luckily I got to pay it all off because we put a 20-year mortgage, but then we paid it off. It was during the pandemic, actually. So I paid it off early, and now, yeah, it's good to me. So as far as, you know, renting out apartments and stuff, it's you try to not rent to young people. You try to stick with older people, and I mean, there's some people in our buildings that have been there for 40 years, you know. So those are kind of the renters that you kind of want to hold on to, right?
And having family that worked in property management, having touched it myself, I understand that struggle of finding the right tenant, or you know, keeping up. What were some of the parameters and issues you ran into with the pandemic? Because a lot of people down here, I'm in New Jersey, America, we had issues of people knowing like, hey, you know what, we don't have to pay, we're just going to hold off and stash all the money the government's helping us. That's not every case, but there were tenants versus landlords and issues like that. So did you run into anything where the government was telling you like, hey, you got to do this?
No. No, we were lucky that we didn't have those issues up here at all.
It's very interesting. So another bullet point I really got to get to was the word kawaii. The how you met your wife was pretty great story on the podcast and going back and forth. But you know, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into it because it just seemed like it went so fast. You know, at that age when you finally met her, you already went through rehab, you already had a first heartbreak and everything. But the way you met her just seemed so random, and you knew it. You said to Lance Cade, rest in peace, my brother. You know, I'm gonna marry her. You said you should. The first date, romantic, and you said you weren't a romantic guy, but she grabbed a beer and you knew like, hey, that's the one. But I think it was 6 months after you proposed on the phone.
Messenger.
Oh, that's even better. Was she mad about that, or she was cool? Like, oh, okay, you know.
Nah, it was cool. I am going back and forth to to Japan and stuff. Like people don't understand. There's a 12-hour difference, so when it usually takes you 2 weeks to just adjust to the time difference, right? But I would wake up usually 8 or 9 o'clock, and then we would talk for about an hour. And she worked in the nightclub industry, so right before she go to work, we talk for an hour, and then she get home usually at 5 o'clock in the morning, which was like, because it's 12 hours difference exactly from Japan time to where I'm at here in the East Coast, Canada, right? So, and then we talk like that, and then I go back over for a tour, and then instead of going back and forth all the time, I told the office I was working for a company called Hustle at the time. And I said, well, instead of flying me back home, I'll just stay here with her in between tours, right? So that was pretty cool. And then yeah, I wasn't used to a different culture, right? Japanese women usually take care of their men.
You said you're not the romantic type.
You did
Not really at all.
But you did put it in perspective, her taking care of you, and I think because she was in the nightlife, you know, it helped that she knew English from coming over and studying. I think it was Cali, but you
Yeah,
know, the fact that she knew the style of business you were in, she knew that you
yeah.
were gonna work those late nights and be gone and come back. It's really hard to find that commitment. What I questioned was when you went to rehab, you said that you had to learn about communication, how you communicated, and that since you've been out of WWE, you're pretty straightforward now. You'll say, you speak your mind. I was wondering, did you fall into any hindrances communicating with her your feelings, or at that time you were pretty, you know, open book? Did you struggle with it? Because I know in the locker room, you know, saying your mind could get you in some trouble, so you gotta be a little
Yeah.
specific.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, she's not in the business, so I mean, yeah, I mean, there's sometimes we'd have to go and Google Translate to find some words, right at the beginning. But now her English is perfect, so there's no lack of communication at all, right? So, yeah, we've been married now 13 years. Yeah, 13 years.
Was it? Because I can't imagine the fear or terror it must have been when the tsunami happened. Because I know she gave you a call. She was like, "Hey, listen, this is
Yeah.
happening." And then you woke up. As a husband, just for your sake, you know, what was your instinct to try and console her and calm her down? Because you never want to wake up to terrible news and then your wife freaking out, whatever the reason. You know, so
Yeah.
what was the game plan to get over ASAP?
I was with All Japan, then I came back 2 days before the tsunami happened
Okay.
to get a waiver to get back into the United States because that's when WWE wanted to rehire me, but I needed to get a waiver in order to them to process a green card. Yeah. So yeah, so 2011, they were actually going to rehire me. They're going to give me a green card. They were giving me a 5-year deal, which was for like 5 times the amount of money that I left for. So 2 days before the tsunami happened, I flew back to Canada, get all that shit done. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, I get a call from her freaking out, crying. And then she says, turn on the TV. So I turned on CNN, and then it's like my whole world is crumbling. Right. And then yeah, the Canadian government actually sent out a press release saying if you don't have to go to Japan, because I mean there was all those nuclear reactors, right? Because that's where the tsunami actually earthquake happened in Sendai, which was near Fukushima, where the all the nuclear power reactors were, and they were scared it was going to blow up and shit. Yeah, it was heavy, man. So I said, fuck the government, I'm flying back in. So I got in the first flight back, and then it was kind of creepy, man, going back to Tokyo because there was no electricity. It was all dark, and all like the vending machines were empty. There was like hardly any water in the country, and yeah, but the All Japan didn't cancel the show. That's where I wrestled with Vader at the sumo arena. That's the thing about Japanese companies, man. They don't cancel shows for you unless they absolutely have to.
That's a great work ethic. Speaking of that, just prompted a question. In Japanese culture, you reaching out to the business, like say you wanted to go to like All Japan, Hustle One or something. If you're not already reached out to by them, you reaching out to them is seen as a no-no. I was wondering why that was seen because I believe it was New Japan that you reached out to at the time after you made a connection.
New Japan was always the one I always wanted to go to, but um, thanks to my relationship with Tajiri, when I asked for my release with WWE, I was already booked with Hustle like 2 days after. And then next year will be 16 years going over there, right? But actually, my first trip to Japan was with WWE when I was 19. So technically, I've been going over there for nearly 20 years, right? But yeah, it's that's just you let them approach you, you don't approach them, you know. So I kind of still have that mindset. It's like WWE reached out a few times, but it just doesn't feel right, right?
You stated that wrestling's only alive in Japan. It's the only purest form. So I can understand that. Let's hop to WWE. First time I really saw you get the big push. You're on SmackDown. You're a singles competitor now, and you have Cafe Dave Rene. And the first guest I remember is Tori Wilson. Love of my 14-year-old life. and you called her a bitch. You fought with John Cena, and it has forever stuck in the back of my mind. Like, that was one of the best, you know, in-ring promos I ever saw. I was curious how that one came about, if you still had recollection of setting that whole situation up, and if it was easy to call Tori Wilson a bitch. I'm just saying that would seem a little hard to me.
No, she's definitely not a bitch, but that's what was written out for me. But Pat Patterson had a lot to do with that too. Because Pat Patterson, you know, some people liked him, some people didn't, but you can't you can't you can't ignore the fact that he was a fucking genius when it came to wrestling. The guy, second to none. Like, not just in ring, just like putting shit together and stuff, like segments and interviews and stuff. The guy was amazing. That's why he was Vince's right hand man for, well, to the day he died, right? So, but yeah, that whole thing was just to build up me and Cena for the pay-per-view in LA, right? And yeah, that was the only single pay-per-view I ever worked. But I mean, in terms of success, I mean, the building was completely sold out, right? And that was a 2-match pay-per-view. Basically, the 2 matches that they built up the most for that pay-per-view was me and Cena, and then Eddie and Bradshaw, right? On the house shows and live events and stuff, nobody could touch me and Cena as far as reaction and stuff. You know what I mean?
Speaking of Pat, one thing with my time training that really hit home was I was doing a match, one of the best matches I've ever seen live. And it wasn't because I was part of it. These guys were truly talented on the independent scene. But I made a mistake as a referee that kind of killed the vibe of the crowd. They boosted it back. Everything was settled. But Jimmy Rave took me aside and said, hey, John, listen, this is, you know, how you should have done this. And that's when the idea of psychology really started clicking in my head. Having had so many dealings with Pat and so many other stars, Pat specifically, I was wondering what's the best piece of psychological in ring help, or even on a promo that he gave you.
Sell, which is something that people don't do these days. I watched an episode of AEW and I'm seeing all. That's why. How many guys have broken their necks on that show already? 3 or 4. Literally 3 or 4 people have broken their necks on that show. If they would sell and make things mean something, you know, I'm seeing guys take DDTs on the floor and they're popping right back up. They're taking like Falcon arrows on the floor, not even going for a pin. And this is a championship match. You know, if you got a championship title match, what's the point? You're trying to win the title, right? You want to pop. They're working for pops, and it's just they're trying to do too much. And guys, you got heavyweights trying to work like cruiserweights, and they're dropping them back in their heads and breaking their necks. And how long has that company been around? 3 years?
Close to it, maybe.
And they've already had 3 or 4 people break their necks.
But I will give you that. I think out of my time there, the hardest thing to learn was to sell. Speaking of doing this, when I met Dean Malenko, he said something along the lines of, if you can work a tag team match brilliantly, that could be better than a singles match. Being that you've been a champion, you've held the titles for singles and tag teams, I was wondering what you preferred, and if you would agree. Which one would you be able to tell the better story with? When you're doing the tag team match, or when you're by yourself and it's just you and another guy going at it?
Well, definitely when you have a tag team and you got guys that can go, it's a lot more exciting, right? You can do a lot cooler stuff. There's always that part of your ego and self-gratification to be a singles wrestler to get all the notoriety on yourself, right? So, but I enjoy both, depending on the days. As I get older, I'd rather do a tag team because I don't have to take as many bumps.
What's the worst bump you ever took? I mean, you have so many injuries and stuff, and you even have the angel of death moment where you woke up during surgery. So it's kind of ridiculous to say.
Did your research, Val.
Thank you. But it's one thing to say what's the worst pain you've ever been in, because you've had different types of pain. But there's always that one drop where you hit the ground and you're like, oh shit, that was different, you know? And that's why they tell us look at the ring and make sure, you know, everything's copacetic. But is there any times like you're like, oh damn, that that just doesn't sit right.
Well, this last time in Noah, it was my first match back in Noah this year. I did a belly to back. I picked the guy up for a belly to back, and my partner hit a neck breaker, right? But when I landed on my side, and I felt the shocks go down both my arms, and my fingers were numb. That's why I just gone for some X-rays. I'm waiting for the results to see if I have any herniated discs in my neck, right? But scary. I remember one time in England, it was a SmackDown taping. It was me and Van Damme, and he gave me a German suplex, and I over rotated and fell right on the back of my neck. Again, both my arms went limp and my feet for about a quick second there. That was scary. Another time I was working the Indies in a company called 1PW in Doncaster, England, and the rails were very close to the ring, but I got to the building late, hadn't had time to really check out the surroundings of the ring and stuff. And when I took it over, like I got sidestepped, thrown over the top rope. And when I take an over the top rope bump, I usually cartwheel my legs. But as I came down, my ankle hit right into the rail. And then my ankle swelled up like the size of a softball. But then I had like 2 week tour of Ireland and a 10-day tour of France starting the next day, right? So that's like nearly 20, I think 18 or 19 matches in 3 weeks to do on a bad ankle. So yeah, that sucked. Also, when I got my teeth knocked out, that was my first week in the United States when I was 18. I had a practice match in HWA that was out of Cincinnati with Spanky, Brian Kendrick. And I shot him in the corner and I did a big dive. He moved. And when I overlapped and I hit the ring post with my teeth. And then whew, all 4 teeth been gone. Yeah, that was pretty nasty too. And of course, broken noses and stuff like that. I had my nose broken 4 times, countless amount of concussions, but that's just part of the game, right?
Yeah, and people hear this and they're like, "Oh my God, why would you want to do it?" I kind of equate it to like not so much UFC, but doing martial arts. The same thing happens. All the injuries Jet Li has, and he's like, "Listen, you just kind of learn to live with it." Wrestlers do the same, but
Yeah.
that feeling, and it's hard to describe. I know exactly what you mean. That adrenaline pump when you're performing, or even if you're in front of just the students and they say, "Hey, do a fake match." That bug as a wrestler is so addictive. I
Yeah.
I question what would be some of the top times that you've had that feeling that it was you and somebody else. Not so much, not just the stone cold moment where he came out and stunned you and the whole place erupted, but I'm talking it was a one-on-one. You guys had the time to create the story, and it was one of those matches that you got the applause. You knew something special happened.
The first time I went to France, because mind you, my character, my gimmick in WWE was from France, right? So 2008, we had started an independent promotion. We toured France. So it was my first night in Paris. And that was the first time that I had a sold out crowd, like 5,000 plus actually cheer me. Because before that, I was always the bad guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that, yeah. And I think the last night was our biggest house. It was like 6,000 people in Marseille. And then I was working with Test, and when you get the whole crowd just popping huge when you win, it's an amazing feeling. It's orgasmic, right? But the time I got to be in the ring with The Rock, that was crazy. And guys like Undertaker and stuff like that too, like especially when we go overseas, like Australia with the Undertaker. Fuck, that's crazy.
And that just sparked two questions. Number one, Taker told you sometimes in this business you have to be selfish. When was a time that you had to implement? It took a little time to understand that. It took a little time to get there to be able to use it all the time now. But what was a time where you had a really good deal or things were looking really good and you said, "No, I got to cap this." And more so something that's not WWE and your dealings with them.
Well, you have to look at this as a business, right? And you're an independent contractor. So Rene Dupree is my own business. So you gotta be selfish and do what's right for you for your career. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if saying a promoter wants you to do something that's not going to benefit you, you understand? You gotta
Yeah.
be selfish. Yeah. But
I
some
know.
guys are in a position where they can't do that because either they need the money, especially the guys that do this full time for a living, right? Which the guys on independence now, unless they they don't really do it as a living. I mean, there's very few that can, right? But but yeah, when you're an independent and something's going to be on television or saying now mostly streaming or YouTube or something, sometimes you got to be selfish for the right reasons and realize, okay, if I'm going to do this match with this guy and the outcome doesn't really benefit me, but it's going to be on the internet forever.
That's like
So
when Pac was gonna have that when AEW had their first big pay-per-view. Pac was the champion at the time, and they wanted him to lose to Adam Page, and he's like, "Listen, I'm the champion. I'm not losing. That's not gonna look good for my promotion." So I have somewhat of a concept of having to make those decisions, but again, my man, it is just I'm at a loss of words because I'm running through all the people you've met, the people you've wrestled, like Great Muta, he's retiring soon, and I already mentioned Rob Van Dam. And when you wrestled him, you said him and Eddie Guerrero were some of the smoothest guys you ever wrestled with. I'm
who's
assuming
this now?
Tamadashi? Is that?
Tomadashi. Tomadashi, that means friend in Japanese.
Oh, I think
Sonata. Seiya
Sonata.
Sonata.
so. It
Yeah.
was Sonata, but at the time I think you first wrestled him, maybe your Japanese wasn't as good. So how did you guys communicate to have such a match where it was just flowing, other than the usual, you set it up with Universal, etc.
Body language, my friend. Go by feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would it still be the heel that would call the match if that's the case?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That's the way it should be.
Another question I had was, kayfabe is not as protected as it used to be. Some people still commit to it, some don't. But what was a kayfabe mistake you made that you had to fix? I remember the one time you went to go help the boys set up the ring, and then they caught you out there. Which I thought in Japan, it's the heels that set up the. They pretty much set up the ring, and then at the end of the show, it's the baby faces because the baby faces get to talk to the crowd. I don't know if that's still nomenclature, if that was ever true, but that was what I was told at school. Is that correct?
No, in major Japanese companies, they have their own ring crew.
Okay.
Yeah. But like the young boys, the trainees, I mean, they do everything. So like in Japan, you you got to train for a minimum of 1 year before you debut, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like they have the right system down as far as breaking guys in because I mean it's like military, dude. When you go over there, like okay, they might pick 1 or 2 a year, right, to live in the dojos, but then they gotta wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning every morning, clean the dojo, get to the training, and they train for usually 4 to 5 hours a day, and then they'll go back to the dojo, prepare all the food. Like they have chanko nabe, which is basically like boiled dinner,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll cook that every day. And they only get to eat once all their senpais, their seniors, eat. So they cook all the food, get it ready, and then when all the elders eat, then they get to have their food, right? And that's just the part of the coming up. You show respect to your elders, and right. I wish I would have broken in that way before I ever went to the United States, because then I have a total different mindset, right? And probably would have guys like Prince Devitt, that's how he broke in. What's his name in WWE?
There's Shinsuke, and I know, bloody hell.
Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about, the little Irish guy.
Maybe
Pac actually
Hornswoggle?
trained there. Huh?
Maybe Hornswoggle?
Hornswoggle.
You said little guy. You said little guy. I'm trying.
Well, Prince Devitt is not very big. Finn Balor. Finn Balor.
Oh, okay. All right, I
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, he trained in the New Japan dojos, right? So he did. And another guy was Chris Benoit. He trained. He broke in Calgary in the dungeon, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then Bad News Brown got him booked over in New Japan, and then he did all that. Stayed in the dojo, woke up every morning, cleaned the dojo, went and trained for 4 or 5 hours, prepared all the food, and You know, if like a senior asks you to do anything, like even untie his boots or lace his boots, you got to do it. You know, but then that 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 mentality, breaking in with that mentality, will actually help you long term. You know,
Because you put so
and
much into it. You know, you busted your
yeah,
ass to get there. You know.
you earn respect, right?
Let's hop to the podcast because I remember when you first dropped, you know, hey, we're going to be doing the podcast and everything. And I already knew of James's work prior to, I believe it was the 90s podcast, but I've seen him do interviews and etc. When he first approached you, like, hey, we could make something out of this because people love talking to you, were you a little hesitant, you know, being the businessman where you are, were you kind of like, nah, let's hop on this?
Well, first I asked how much I was going to make. Then he had to explain to me how it worked, right? And this was during the pandemic. So up here in Canada, there was absolutely no shows, and Japan was, in Europe where I work mostly, was, you know, there was no shows going on, right? Couldn't get into the country. So I figured, well, I'm bored as hell. Might as well do something. So we started just like once a week, you know, an hour a week, and we talk, and then we started doing it twice a week, you know. Then we started bringing on guests, and I mean, we're not where I'd like to be, but I mean, for a little over a year, having close to 4 million views, I mean, that's pretty good, I guess, right?
And the subscribers as well, almost 15,000. Hopefully at the end of the month, that's the goal.
Yeah, that's the goal, man. I think as of today, we're at 14,250. So hopefully we get the 15,000. But yeah, the subscribers, I don't know how important really that is. I know it's the views that's as far as making money, right?
It's a little bit of both. But
Yeah.
what I noticed is how you guys had your back and forth. I was curious, was there an unease and you had to ease into a comfortability of going back and forth? Because you said to guests, it's like, hey, James is here as like the fan perspective. But having worked in this industry in radio, TV, a lot of people wouldn't notice how quick he is to see his opportunity to interject himself, but is still being respectful of the conversation that you guys are having. Steven Richards was great. He was like, hey, you're a part of this too. Talk when you want. But he's very dynamic with going back and forth and interjecting. And it seems the more you guys have done this, it's a little easier for you guys to go back and forth. He's constantly reading your reactions and seeing how you're responding. So, did you have any kind of like, oh, this is a little awkward at first, and then you kind of just meshed and it got a little better? Or were you kind of like, no, I've always been comfortable with him. I'm just doing me?
Well, I made it very clear at the beginning. It's like, listen, I'm in the business. So, you know, you're a fan. Now, you might hear things on the internet, and but there's an old saying in this business: you believe nothing of what you hear and half of what you see, right? So just because shit's out there in the internet doesn't. Yeah, it kind of reminds me when I was in kindergarten, right? I remember this for some reason. The teacher made us all sit in a circle, and then she would whisper a line, like a sentence to the first kid, and then you had to whisper it in everybody's ear, and it went all around the circle, right? And then at the end, the last person would say the sentence back, but it was completely, totally different than what the original sentence was. That's a lot of the shit you hear on the internet, like these wrestling. Like, for example, I had an issue with Bob Holly, right? What had happened is we were riding together. He had to go back to Alabama because there was a big hurricane. I got a traffic ticket, parking ticket, and then there was a situation arose where we got physical or whatever. I don't want to get into it, but basically, I'm hearing stories of, oh yeah, Rene totaled his rent-a-car, and set it on fire. I was like, that's not what happened at all. See how stories get exaggerated and blown out of proportion, right?
Indeed.
So me being in the business, I understand that, and I know a lot of the stories that are out there about different people are complete bullshit, right? And that's why you believe nothing of what you hear. I mean, some are accurate, some are true that come out, but a lot of them are so far from the truth that you know. So that's the one dynamic that I make clear to James is like, listen, if we're going to do this, don't blurt out bullshit because I'll call you out on it, right?
having been one time, I was at Atlantic City when AEW was performing. I got backstage and I got to chop it up with some of the wrestlers and some of the guys working, and it was really weird to see some of the things I saw, and it really played back to what you just said. Don't believe what you read on the internet. You know, most of the stuff that happened back there, I just never mention it because, you know, I have other friends that are still on the independents. They'll ask a question. I'll be like, just do this, man. You'll be okay. So I know everything about Bob has been documented. I know Buba Ray's been documented. A couple people you've had issues with in the back, and these are legitimate. They owe you an apology and vice. I was curious if it ever came down to it on the podcast. If one of them reached out to you and said, "Hey, legitimately, we're a little older now. I owe you an apology. I would like to, you know, make things right." Would you be open to having them on the podcast to do so? Or is it one of those cases where it's like, you know what? I have my piece. You just need to stay away from me and we'll be okay.
Second.
Understandable. But it's also, again, already documented. The things that have happened is just, it's really out there. But on to happier news. Paul London on the podcast has made it hella fun. He's just a jokester. And before Paul, I would notice which interviews you would open up and you would talk to the guys or you let, you know, whoever's on just have their moment. But the back and forth between you and Paul is just golden. He's hilarious. He knows when to punch, but he's also a real dude. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, why do you think you guys get along so well? And why do you think, especially in the podcast format, it gels so perfectly, other than the fact that you guys have traveled and have all these crazy stories?
Yeah, me and Paul always got along. I'm like, in the wrestling business, he's probably my closest friend, right? And that's why I brought him on, because a lot of this crazy stuff that happened to me, for some reason, Paul was always there with me, you know. So we traveled together and stuff. And yeah, I mean, I spent Christmases with Paul. I spent birthdays with Paul. You know, there's a few guys in this business where you really, you know, it's like a brotherhood because you're on the road so much that they become family almost, right? Or closest thing to family. So yeah, I knew having him on would definitely add to entertainment, because basically, let's face it, a YouTube channel is entertainment, right? You got to be entertaining for people to tune in and keep tuning in and people to subscribe. So I know how talented and entertaining Paul London is, right? I think he's very underrated as far as that aspect. So I know bringing him on was great. But that's the thing, I don't want to overexpose people, because that's another problem. A lot of guys on TV, I'll use Dolph Ziggler for an example. Dolph Ziggler is incredibly fucking talented, very, very talented, but you've been seeing him for so long that it's like, oh, this guy again, right? You understand? So that's why you try to limit. Like, I don't want to go on every week either. That's why I don't want to have Paul on every week. So that way, there, when he finally comes on, people are, oh, right, yeah. And then they'll send in questions, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, watching all of the interviews and just following along, I think the most impactful and the most fun for me to watch, as far as I learned something, I grabbed something from this. I feel like I've learned a lot better, was your interview with Matt Morgan. Not so much like, hey, people are dying on opioids, but I was like, here's two guys. They fought their demons, they overcame them, and here they are trying to help people. You're an advocate for helping people that are on the pain medications. After you're dealing with Matt Morgan and speaking on it, what are you doing other than just the awareness, telling the boys like, hey, be careful of this stuff? You know, are you still doing 12-step programs? Do you sponsor anybody? How else are you helping, trying to wisen up people to being careful with pain medications in the business, because it's been such a detriment to people, and they've lost their lives, and it's really something. It's like 10 days you're hooked, man, and it's not going to be easy come down.
I think a lot of people in the business now learned from other people's mistakes, and they, you know what I mean? Plus, I credit the higher, well, let's face it, WWE, for not letting guys, if the guys are hurt now, they're going to give them the time off and let them rest. You know what I mean? Which, when I was there, that was not the case, because people are paranoid about losing their spot, right? And I think the son-in-law, Triple H, is good for that too. You know what I mean? Because let's face it, every member of his little group, the clique, all had substance abuse issues, right? So I think the business evolved in a better way, and I credit WWE. My hats off to them for, hey, listen, these guys, maybe at one point in time, Vince McMahon had to deal with a lot of shady characters in wrestling who would maybe pretend to be hurt just to like not wrestle and collect a paycheck, right? But now I think there's this generation of wrestlers legitimately want to go out there and bust their ass and, you know, perform. But the thing is, this ain't ballet. And when we take those hits, especially now with a lot, like we just mentioned, AEW had like 3 or 4 guys break their necks already, and they've only been around for 3 years. So, you know what I mean? So, but like at the point in time when I was there, it's like you were paranoid about losing your spot. And I seen guys like Test, when he broke his neck, get fired. So, yeah, you know what I mean?
And that's
So
stressful
that's why,
working conditions.
yeah, exactly. So and I was told from my father right from the get go, if you're injured, don't let them see it because that could hinder you going higher. They think you're not tough enough. You know what I mean? But I mean, shit, it put so much pressure on guys, especially in the WWE at the point in time that I was there, on your physique, to be so lean and so ripped. And so, but the thing is, when you're that lean and that ripped and you're taking all those bumps, you have less padding. That's why so many guys tear their muscles. I mean, it's shit. Look at all, like John Cena tore multiple muscles, Batista, Triple H. I mean, how many guys have torn their muscles because they're so jacked and they're taking all these risks and these bumps, and they mess up their bodies, right? That's what led a lot of guys down that painkiller road, right? So, um, yeah, the only thing I say now is, guys, fuck. I know you're only wrestling once a week, and I know you guys want to steal the show, but sell, take it easy on your bodies, because a lot of these guys now, man, I'm telling you, in 10, 15 years, they're going to be in wheelchairs. Just wait and see. Wheelchairs by the time they're 40. You'll see.
And I think that's the problem, the selling. Like, you were a big fan of the 60s wrestling, watching the real up and comers. Even before my generation knew Hulk Hogan, we're talking the originators of telling a story and not really, like, a body slam would be the big pop moment. Like, oh, damn, he dropped him. You know, being that, you're using this podcast to stay connected to wrestling, being that you have such a legacy, especially with your father, what are the chances that you're going to start another promotion when your bump card is up? Or do you think you're pretty much good with, hey, you know what, I got the podcast, I'm helping this way? Because you said it yourself, you're at your prime now. They could put you anywhere. You can wrestle, you can produce. What would you like to do as far as after that last bump?
I've promoted about 100 shows already in my little area here, and that's stressful, especially the way I did it. Because most guys, they might run one show a month or one show every 3 or 4 months. I ran 30 shows in 30 days. Try doing that. That's fucking stressful, my friend. Um, but yeah, I'll be involved. I mean, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but I have been in talks with major companies in the United States. But again, I'm waiting for these X-rays. I should be getting a call any day now to see it, because I mean, I'm almost 40, and I've been doing this since I was 14. So do the math. That's 25 years, right?
On your back.
Yeah, and don't forget, when I broke in at 14, I was wrestling 7 nights a week. When I was 15, I did 128 matches in a row without a day off, May 1st to September 7th, 7 nights a week, twice on Sunday. So it's like some guys say, yeah, I've been in the business 20 years. So how many matches you got? Oh, I got about 300.
Jeez.
Okay, yeah. Well, I've been in the business 25 years and I got about 5,000 matches. So,
And people, let me tell you, even if you take one bump, that messes up your back. I still can't sleep right. it's got to be a certain mattress. Sleeping on the floor is way better. So it's no joke, the pain and the physicality of this all. You know, I'm from New Jersey, Philadelphia. I know you had a couple of spots here, but you know, I was wondering if you had any positive moments in this area you remember wrestling with WWE other than the Royal Rumble. That was my shining moment. I saw you do the French tickle. I was like, yeah, and then get them. Like, but any positive moments out of Philadelphia or the New Jersey area in the States?
In the States, of course. Philly. I remember, I think we worked, see, me and Van Damme have had like probably 300 matches. I remember one time, I think we were doing a velocity match or a Sunday Night Heat match in Philadelphia. And I mean, that's Rob Van Dam territory, ECW territory, right, Philly?
Yeah.
But I remember after we had our match, Van Dam won with the 5-star, but I remember the front row gave me a standing ovation because they appreciated the effort that I put in, right? So that felt good, you know. But I mean, yeah, the Northeast United States is a hardcore. They love their wrestling, right? I compare it to like Toronto and in Canada, you know. But I'd be lying if I'd say I don't miss wrestling in the United States. I mean, I've had a few shots here and there just on independence and stuff, like in Portland and West Virginia and stuff. And I know if I did go back, if I were to go back, I mean, the clock's ticking, right?
Yeah.
I'm not getting any younger. And I'd hate to look back and say, oh shit, I should have went back for another run, or I should have tried to. Because when I was working for Wrestle One in Japan, TNA approached me to go work there. But and I basically declined their offer. And I don't regret that one bit, because from what I hear, a lot of guys didn't get paid, or they got paid late, or they'd only get paid per match and they were lied to. So one thing about wrestling in Japan, I never had an issue with pay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like the decisions you made were perfect timing. But if you do get an opportunity, I'm not saying because I'm a big Billy Corgan fan, but NWA, you know, that might be a nice little stop by. But, you know, you've done this for so long and you've gotten so much heat, you've gotten a lot of praise. There's always that one fan or a couple fan interactions that they catch you off guard. You know, whether they humble you, whether you're like, holy shit, I didn't know you know, that meant so much to you. You know, you're welcome. I was the bad guy and you still loved me. So what was a one-on-one fan interaction where they caught you off guard and they were just so appreciative of the work and the body of sacrifice that you made for this business?
I remember one time I was somewhere in the United States, and then this guy came up dressed up just like me with the beret and he made like his own robe. That was kind of cool. uh a lot of wrestlers in Canada would actually pay the promoter to wrestle me. That's kind of humbling, you know. And then a lot of fans, like a lot of Japanese fans, would write me letters. They would send it to the office, and the office would give it to me and translate it for me, and saying that I'm their idol and they want to get into wrestling to be just like me and stuff. And that's when I got into wrestling, I never dreamt of affecting people's lives in that way, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just did it because I love wrestling and I wanted to pursue this as a career, right? But yeah, you don't realize how many people's lives you affect. I mean, there's always the assholes, like especially on social media, they get the random messages like, "I hate you, you're overrated," dude, bullshit. You know, you got the haters, right? That comes with the territory. But then when you have guys that say, "Hey, man, you changed my life," especially when I talk about the opiates and addiction and stuff, and I'll get these comments and people messaging me say, "Hey, man, like you talking about this really helped me," and you know, that motivates them to go to a 12-step meeting or something. You know, if I can tell my story and it helps one person change their life around, I mean, that's worth it, right?
My dad is he's a callous individual. He's a product of his time, but there's very few people he gives credit to. And, Ozzy's one of those dudes, AC/DC, a couple people here and there. And wrestling, when he took me to the Royal Rumble 2004, he was not a fan. Hated every minute of it. He's like, Margaret, there's a guy in the ring wasting beer. These idiots over here are cheering. But he's very intellectual. Like, you ask him any question, like, why is sleep good for you or milk? And he'll be able to break it down. But I remember when you guys did tribute to the troops. And that was something where, he found out where you guys were, wasn't bashing you guys, but he showed appreciation for you guys doing that because both my parents are in the United States military. I look back at that time. Basically, they were saying, it's volunteer, but it's not volunteer. And it was just a hell of a time for you, not in a good way. Sleeping. I think the only positive thing you might have got from that was seeing Vince McMahon asleep. That's something you could hold over people. But was there any positive moment with somebody there that made the trip worth it to you? Not saying, anything about like your thoughts of outgoing or anything, but something that was positive for you because the story just seemed so brutal for you. And then to see my dad be so appreciative of that work you did, that really took me, it takes me back to remember that so many years ago. We're talking 2004, it's 2022.
I didn't realize how much press I got it because when I went over there, I had a huge write up in the local newspaper here in Canada, highlighting the fact that I was going to Iraq to do that show, right? And then I was living in Louisville, Kentucky at the time, and then the Louisville paper actually had a picture of me saying Louisville native. So all of a sudden, I'm born and raised in Kentucky for some reason, even though I'm French Canadian. But I remember having an interaction with an 18-year-old soldier. Now, mind you, I'm 20 at this time, right? So here was this 18-year-old kid, and he had this huge gun that was bigger than him, and he was so happy to see us. And I had told him about me getting food poisoning. He said, "Oh man, that's normal. When I got here, I ate some of the beef patties too, and man, fuck, I was on the toilet for a week." So I was like, "Oh, okay, it's not just me." But I remember just realizing how some people, maybe he came from maybe a lower income housing or a lower income family to where he had very limited options as far as career choices in life, maybe because he couldn't afford to go to college or whatever, and he was just there to get some type of degree maybe that the army would provide him, and then feeling just how blessed I was to be able to follow my dreams and where I was at in life, that a lot of people don't have those opportunities, right? So that was kind of cool.
I love how wrestling still is like back in the day it was carnies. These are the rough men that can't necessarily get a normal job. So, you know, the outlets, the possibilities it can do. I always look at my parents, they use the military to get ahead. That's how a lot of my friends are using wrestling. I always end these interviews with the most important question. And it could be funny, it could be serious, but what was the best piece of advice somebody told you that readily comes to mind? I've gotten, is the fucking you're giving worth the fucking you're getting? I got rent a tour bus, don't buy one, but there's always something that somebody said it could have been off the cuff remark, but it has stuck with you through the ages and you use it today.
Best piece of advice?
Yeah. Also, you got really dark, my man.
Yeah, sorry, I had to step outside here. It's December 7th in Canada, and it's actually warm. I realize that giving comes back in spades. Like, for example, helping people out comes back to you. I believe in karma. I believe in bad karma. I believe in good karma. But if you help somebody out, giving is a lot better than receiving. You know what I mean? Maybe at one point in my life, I felt I was selfish and I want for me. And then getting envious at people that had stuff that I didn't. And I'm thinking like, why them? Why not me? But then I realized as you get older is if you help somebody out, and it doesn't necessarily have to be financially, You know, it could be helping someone change a tire, or helping someone get a job, or that shit comes back to you. You know, it might not be the next day or the next week or the next year, but you do good for people, it'll come back. It's like, for example, The Rock, right? You know, Downtown Bruno, Harvey Whippleman. When The Rock was first breaking in, he would stay with Downtown Bruno in Memphis, right? And, you know, help take care of him, teach him the road, maybe help him out with some money when he had none, you know? And all these years later, look what happened. The Rock goes and buys him a brand new fucking truck, $80,000, $90,000 truck. You know what I mean? So you see how helping people out in life will come back to you. Yeah. So that's the best piece of advice I can give people is, if you're blessed in life and fortunate in life and you help somebody out, and it doesn't necessarily have to be financially, that shit will come back to reward you somewhere down the line. It also goes the other way too. If you fuck somebody over, that shit will come back to haunt you somewhere. Right?
Ladies and gentlemen, truly an epic talk. It was a wonderful interview with Rene Dupree. Check him out on Cafe de Rene. The podcast is on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, the merch on Spotify, on social media. You can check him out, Cafe de Rene, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And most importantly, you got to check out the Too Tough to Die shirts he just dropped, man. I got one on the way. But most importantly, sir, thank you so much for your time. It was great to speak with you.
All right, my friend, you take care and God bless, okay? Merry Christmas.
And everybody else, be smart, be mindful, and rock on. Ninja out.
Woo, baby, you listen to John the Ninja. All your ears are about to go on a vacation. John the Ninja's got what you need.